There are lots of scary things out there. Here's one that might make your skin crawl: mosquitoes that carry and transmit the virus that causes AIDS. But this doesn't happen. Mosquitoes can't transmit HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, and we have the science to prove it. So why do we even think that they can? Well, we know that mosquitoes transmit all sorts of other human diseases like malaria, yellow fever, Zika, dengue fever, and chikungunya. So it seems plausible that they could also transmit HIV. And in the early days of the epidemic, before we knew how HIV worked, this was a real concern. One reason scientists thought mosquitoes might be able to transmit HIV is because the virus hangs out in blood. And we know that mosquitoes feed on blood. Perhaps they pick up the virus while they're redoing that and then transmit it to us when they bite us again. But there are two problems with this idea. First, we now know that HIV can't survive outside of a person very well. It needs to be inside a human host in order to replicate. So it probably wouldn't be able to survive in a mosquito long enough to get from one person to another. Second, even if it did survive in a mosquito, it wouldn't be able to find its way into our bloodstream when we get bitten. You see, when a mosquito bites someone, it injects a little bit of its own saliva into the person to help the blood it is sucking along. But this saliva doesn't contain any HIV, so if the mosquito had picked up some virus particles while feeding on someone else, they wouldn't be coming along for the ride in the mosquito saliva. Any virus that was on the mosquito's mouthparts would be destroyed when the person bit them cleaned off with the next bite. That means any HIV on the mosquito's mouthparts wouldn't make it into our bodies when they bite us. Even if some of the virus made it past those initial barriers, HIV specifically targets immune cells called CD for T cells. But mosquitoes don't have any cells that are like ours. So the virus wouldn't be able to use a mosquito as a host at all. But these aren't the only reasons that mosquitoes can't transmit HIV. Another big one is that the virus just isn't present in mosquito saliva. If you took all the saliva from a bunch of different mosquitoes, you would be able to detect HIV RNA in it. And what's more, the amount of HIV RNA would be similar to what you find in the saliva of people who have HIV. But there's no overlap between the two groups. Mosquito saliva samples were negative for HIV, and since we've been doing tons of research on this topic, if mosquitoes could transmit HIV, we'd probably have figured it out by now. We haven't found any evidence that they do. To put it plainly, we have pretty thoroughly investigated this question, and the answer is no, they can't. Now, despite the fact that there is zero evidence that mosquitoes transmit HIV, there is still a lot of stigma against people who work with mosquitoes. In 2018, 2 labs in Brazil reported finding HIV in mosquitoes. They claimed that they had collected the first molecular evidence for mosquito-borne transmission of HIV, but their results were questioned by the broader scientific community. They couldn't show that the virus they had isolated from the mosquitoes was actually infectious. Nonetheless, there were still threats against the researchers. One lab member even received an email saying that they should kill themselves. There's also a common misconception that the Zika virus, which is spread by mosquitoes, can be transmitted through sex. This idea came out of a 2016 report of a man in Texas who had symptoms of Zika and tested positive for the virus, even though he'd never traveled to an area where Zika was known to be spreading. But the CDC determined that he most likely contracted the virus through sexual transmission rather than through mosquito bites. This fear has not only led to unnecessary testing, but also to discrimination against people living with HIV. When the Texas Department of State Health Services announced that the man had likely gotten Zika through sex, they also said that anyone who had had sex with him within a month of his symptom onset should get tested for HIV, even though they were unlikely to have contracted the virus. So let's sum it up. No, mosquitoes can't transmit HIV. We have mountains of evidence to back that up. And it is important to remember that stigma and fear surrounding diseases can lead to discrimination and violence against individuals. As scary as diseases are, it's important to remember that they don't define the people who have them. Thank you for watching this episode. If you want to learn more about how viruses work, check out the playlist in the card.